That's brilliant. So now we'll have the panel to kind of be within our panel discussion, and we've got some questions coming in from in the Q&A, and I just encourage people to post some more questions as we go, but we'll set off on some of the questions I think you posed each other in a way. So we didn't plan this at all, but you all talked about scale. And I thought that was fascinating because I don't remember discussing that at all last week when we were preparing. So I wonder for those listening who may be in modest organisations, what's that to do with them? In other words, this need for scale for enterprise and for digital to work. How can it work? How can what is a relatively fragmented kind of SME-based sector operate at scale digitally? And it's totally unfair, but I'm going to ask Camilla first.
It's fine. We operate at scale with lots of SMEs. I think there are just massive, huge advantages to collaboration, and Chris has been talking about collaboration here as well. And interestingly, I was nodding as he was talking along with many of these challenges around bringing other people on, particularly around finding the people at the top that can make the decisions, and sort of really conveying to them the opportunities of working together. And certainly working at scale. So for us, large scale digitization projects, and then working with what is now 3,500 museums, it gives us lots of contacts. We very much hear what people need, because we're always talking to collections. We're talking to them if we're in a storeroom digitizing a sculpture. We're talking to them on social with feedback that we're getting through. We run webinars for collections, so we're always getting this feedback. We have our sector steering panels as well, and we're able in many ways to bring these together. So the e-commerce solution has arisen out of this question. Why can't we do print on demand? You have the image assets. Why can't we print the photographs that are on Art UK? And so scale enables us to, ironically, it enables us to be agile, because it gives us enough of an audience and enough participants to drive a project forward. We don't need 3,500 people to move forward with every project. We need a strategic vision and 10 partners to get a project off the ground. And once we have run this as a trial project, this is exactly what we did with the shop, once we have run it as a pilot project, then we have learnings from that. We have insight. We know what works, we know what doesn't work. We can take what works to our steering panels. We can bring in external organizations and again, this came through in other conversations as well, where we lack knowledge within the teams. I have definitely benefited from building a team that has come with specific areas of expertise that I lack. And it enables us to make strategically appropriate decisions, I think, by being able to work at scale.
Great. There is no simple answer to this. And Sophia, you mentioned scale several times. Have you got a view on how, say, medium-sized heritage organisations can achieve scale through working with others? Is it always about platforms like Art UK, or are there other models?
I think when thinking about digital and scale, it's quite important to make the distinction between the sort of innovative, the R&D, the type of projects I was talking about, which are things you hope to be able to scale up, that they'll catch on and become a success and you can do bigger things with them. And the sort of, in a sense, business as usual digital, digital enterprise is just as obviously kind of selling tickets to your event digitally, or keeping track of your payroll digitally and doing digital finance. And those sorts of things, you're taking advantage of someone else's scale. You're using a tool or a platform. You don't have to develop it yourself. You can take advantage of a commercially available tool like Eventbrite, or you can take advantage of the audience agency's statistics about visitors or what have you. And so that sort of thing, in a sense, the scale is external to you, and you don't need to be ambitious about that sort of digital enterprise. You might just say, I want something simple that will let me sell this. I want to print postcards and sell them in my gift shop. And it's okay to not be ambitious about that. Like, not everything has to conquer the world. And I don't think you need to feel that digital has to conquer the world. You can take advantage of something very efficient that somebody else has created and sold at scale, and that's fine. But in terms of innovation, collaboration, yes, is absolutely key. And you have to be very savvy. I think what I've heard from people is, collaboration does take a huge amount of time and energy to do well. And so I think you need to be very, very savvy about when you want to leap into something and when you don't, because there are many things that will just take up your time and not give you a return in terms of money or in terms of learning, but the right ones are out there.
Great. Yeah, and we had a comment from Edmund at Historic England about collaboration being hard, but in some ways digital, we don't really mean here the digital R&D, but just kind of digital collaboration platforms like this, and like the Google Doc that we've used to plan the webinar, Xero accounting software, the kind of thing that Sphere was mentioning. Those kinds of things do suddenly make multi-organizational and at a distance collaboration easier, certainly, than it used to be when I started work 30 years ago, or whenever it was. Longer than that, I'm afraid. There's a question from, I'm going to mispronounce the name, I suspect. I'm going to guess Concha, but that could be wrong. From Innova to Art UK, but I actually think it's a more general point that we kind of touched on around, is data and content open? What IP do you retain? What do you charge for, when, in what circumstances? And so there's a specific question for you there, Camilla, but then also maybe, Chris, after you're a data organization, and I've worked with you for a couple of years, and I don't know which you give away and which you sell. So, but Camilla, the specific question about high-res images, and are they made available for free, or is that one of the licensing things that you do?
Okay, so it's a bit of a minefield around high-resolution images at the moment, and as an organisation that works across the sector, we are very mindful of trying to give everything to all collections in relation to open data. So there are collections, increasing number of collections that make available their high resolution artwork assets available for download. We don't do that at Art UK. We have a range of Creative Commons licenses that are applied to all the content on Art UK. This sort of complex network of licenses is managed by our extremely experienced and really dedicated copyright team. And so through our contracts with collections, we allow them to assign the appropriate license to their artworks. Collections can sign up to do image licensing through the Art UK shop, i.e. and make their high resolution artwork assets available for commercial use. That is a separate contract. It's by individual negotiation with individual collections. Some agree to do that. Some are giving their artwork assets away freely available on their own site, so they don't do that. So it's not a one size fits all. We enable what permissions we can to allow collections to do what they want to, and we're always looking at this. We're always looking at how we can improve this. Where is the sector going? We were just discussing this with our steering panel the other day. Are the questions we're asking in relation to free assets the same now that we will be asking in 5 years' time? How quickly is this field moving? So the sort of image licensing, it works with these layers of permissions. For the print on demand and the products, again, that's a separate contract. Collections agree which artworks they want to made available. Not all the artworks on Art UK are available for everything. It just depends on what permissions collections assign. And Chris, I'll leave you to answer the sort of more general point there about sort of to broaden this out a little bit.
Okay, in terms of data and products, we have a sort of range of views, I suppose. Certainly, we have a conversation every time with our clients, who are always interested to hold the copyright of everything that we produce. And that was something that we were previously fairly naive about negotiating over. There is a requirement to deposit the results of archaeological work in a public archive. So, in the sense of the production of the raw data, if you like, and indeed some of the interpreted data, that will go into the public domain, and that is part of our charitable delivery. We increasingly negotiate with our clients so that we hold the copyright, so it's easier for us to do that, and it's easier for us to resolve embedded copyright problems such as Ordnance Survey licensing or the use of other people's third-party data, which can be very complicated. In terms of our published output, we are moving towards making all of our publications freely available online on a print-on-demand basis. That will be the direction of travel. So we're not looking to monetize the academic publications or the synthetic publications that we produce. What we are interested to monetize is the edutainment, if you like, if you're content with that word, value of an interaction with archaeology. And we're also interested in monetizing the use of archaeological experiences, digital or otherwise, as part of social prescribing offers. So we think there are different avenues for monetization that don't mean putting a control over the products themselves.
Goodness, rights and content, it's and data, it's complicated. You mentioned one of your early kind of entrepreneurial experiences, which I think does affect whether you're kind of where you learn your enterprise and entrepreneurship. I realized that at school I wrote all my revision notes for each subject on 2 sides of A4 and got my mum to photocopy it, and then charged people to have those revision notes, which I then turned into a software business when I was 17. And the serious point there is, I think that we tend to think of the heritage sector assets being land and buildings, and that is true, but the UK is a knowledge economy, and for quite a long time, and I always forget how many years, but it's something like 18 or 20, we've invested more in intangible assets as an economy than we have in intangible, so more than equipment, you know, tools, land, buildings, or whatever, and that's fundamental to the fact that we are a creative and heritage is part of the wider kind of creative industries. So I think that the digital leadership and the enterprise slant on it is in many ways pushing all of us as people leading different aspects of heritage to think about those intangible assets. And I think, Chris, you were talking more about things that were kind of knowledge, and research and evidence, and maybe a kind of data sets that were kind of representative of spatial things. And then Camilla, you were talking more about kind of classic image content, but perhaps some of the related data as well. I kind of moving on, and maybe to Sophia first next. There's a question about what's the challenge for heritage organisations about generating income? Is it knowing what to do or how to do it? And I suspected that you and I might think that the question might be more a question of motivation and why, but I don't want to prejudge your comment.
Yes, there's a few things. I've been pondering this one. This is an interesting question. I was hoping it would come to me. The simple fact is heritage in general does generate enormous amounts of income, or could generate enormous amounts of income. If you wanted to set up a digital auction and auction off the Staffordshire hoard, I reckon you could earn quite a bit of money doing that. For that matter, the sale of Beatles albums is doing pretty well, and those are heritage by now, practically. So it kind of depends on how you do it and what you define. The thing that hampers the sort of heritage organizations that we're talking about is because your main aim is the public good. That's why you wouldn't auction off the Staffordshire hoard. That's why you're holding on to a lot of things that cost a lot of money to take care of and maybe don't have an immediate value to just holding them. So it is hard. There is a long tail of content, and as you say, there are certain things that will be very popular, and there are a lot of things that won't. And for the public good, you're trying to take care of all of them, and you're trying to share all of them. But there is also this thing about enthusiasm, and the fact that it's not immediately obvious how to monetize heritage while you're also protecting heritage means that the people who are, by and large, really, really enthusiastic about earning money are more likely to go into investment banking or property management or what have you. You know, there are other lines of work. There may be lines of work where you can, you know, deal with heritage things. You can work for Sotheby's and you can handle heritage and you can make money. So the people who are going into the heritage charity sector, with a few exceptions like Patrick perhaps, are not the ones who wake up thinking, oh, wow, isn't it great? I can create a business model today. So I think there is something about the enthusiasm, and there is something about the challenge. And I think there is something about the culture of the heritage sector in a way that, although we're now talking more about these things and it's now becoming more of an imperative, in the past, it hasn't really been viewed as the most important thing about working in heritage. And so there might be some parts of the sector or in some countries where there's more of an entrepreneurial attitude about it, and that may shift. So it's a combination of things that I think leads who's interested, the fact that it's not the most obvious sector to make money on. And because of that, it leads to a culture and it leads to lack of knowledge that I think we're doing a small part to try to fix now. I'd be interested to know if people agree with me about all of that or not.
Camilla, what's your view on the motivation of your partners to make money, and then, you know, the next level down in the sense of you collaborating with them to work out what is exploited, because you're providing the how?
I sort of may partly answer your question. I'm sort of partly responding to Sophia as well. I think there is definite, so the funding models for organisations have changed over the last 10 years. We're all very aware of that, and the need for us all to generate revenue to support our sustainability has become very ingrained in leaders, the thinking of leaders. We all have to be addressing how we are going to support ourselves as organisations and factor that into our longevity. So I think people are thinking more commercially organisations than they ever have before. I see certainly during COVID, a massive explosion in individual heritage organisations setting up e-commerce sites, partly because of capacity. People were actually outside of the collections, they were working from home, they had the physical time to do these things, and partly because of that, that top-down direction that we need to be looking at how our doors are closed, our cafes are closed, we need to be looking at opportunities to generate revenue here. But as a sector, we struggle with revenue. We struggle with, you know, simple things like advertising revenue, and the support of, and I spoke about sort of my inability to get John Lewis to join our steering panel. The support of, you know, big tech, big organisations who care about the heritage organisations enough to invest time and energy into it, and the budget to effectively advertise, certainly at an e-commerce level, at a digital level. Digital advertising is expensive. You know, having a team that runs a digital advertising budget so that you are confident that your material is sitting at the top of Google search, or is paid content, or is coming through in Google Shopping. It takes a lot of financial resource. It takes a lot of internal investment as well. And these are challenging things to navigate. They're challenging at a financial level, they are challenging at a knowledge level. Google Ads and Google Shopping, notoriously difficult to get the algorithm right on these things and make sure your content is. So we have an agency that manages this for us. Half the time the agency gets it wrong as well, because Google have changed the algorithm and it's not working the way it was 2 weeks ago. So we are constantly experimenting with the best way to surface our content with a much smaller budget than other organizations that we might be competing with.
Goodness, I wouldn't know how to commission that, let alone do it. And in fact, that neatly segues us onto, I think, our last section of our discussion has been set by one of our participants.
Can I say something, one thing, sorry, about, come back on, I want to just say something provocative about leadership and about heritage and entrepreneurship. A lot of the people in the creative industries I work with in startups, they're going to sell their immersive content idea to Epic Games, or they're going to sell it to British Airways, and they're going to get rich. And frankly, that's the motive. You know, they're going to make out of doing good digital enterprise, they are personally, if all goes well, going to make quite a bit of money. And in a heritage organization, that's not the case. And we're not in it because we want to make a lot of money, I think, in general. But it's an interesting thing to think about. You know, there's a personal motive in the commercial sphere that people in heritage organizations don't have. And that's maybe worth thinking about.
Well, indeed, there is quite a lot of privately held heritage in terms of certain buildings, but also it's fascinating to see, say, in the performing arts sector, not the kind of arts end of culture rather than the heritage end, the role that private companies and private finance played in film performance. So that, you know, RSC Live, Royal Opera House Live, the equivalents at ENO and everything else, and not in every case, but in most cases there was a commercial partner there. And in the I mean, the Royal Opera House was an unusual case where in the end actually their enterprises division became extremely well adept at doing it, and in fact bought one of the publishing distribution companies that was to do with CDs and other publishing. So it was almost the other way around, but that was partly because they had an enterprise division. But the challenge has been couched in terms of what Chris said about being captain, not chief engineer. And in a way, it's the question is, how do you get the right crew? How do leaders and boards find that right mix? And you've all talked about the range of skills required here. And so I will go to Chris first on this, but how as a leader do you get the right people to not just complement what you know you don't know, but also to kind of, in a sense, deal with those unknown unknowns?
There are people within your organization already who have the right skills and the right tendencies and the right attributes. You can and you can find them, and I think you do that by expressing the vision repeatedly and making it sufficiently exciting, unbelievable for people to put up a hand and say, you know what, I quite fancy a crack at that. But that's not the only source, and we have definitely realized that we needed to broaden our reach when we're recruiting and to look across into other related disciplines, charity sector, for us, marine survey sector, hard technical disciplines, in order to find people, even legal and professional project management type skill sets. You know, all of those. we've recruited in the last couple of years from people who've never worked in our sector before. What's interesting, I think, is that one effect of the pandemic is people thinking, and particularly the climate crisis, people are thinking about what kind of contribution they want to make over their careers, and they're finding that heritage, in some senses, is a means to give back. So we're finding people who are mid-career in, say, petrochemicals, and they're very keen to switch into our sector to come and do good.
Yeah, we're for our tech recruitment, we're definitely looking to that tech for good world where people haven't necessarily worked in arts, culture or heritage before, definitely. Camilla, you've talked about commissioning things that I wouldn't know how to commission. How do you assemble the right skills around you? And I don't just mean, I suppose, the more technical, but perhaps some of the commercial enterprise ones, or just even different lived experience or different attitudes. How do you and your fellow executives kind of build that team?
So I think it starts with a clear digital strategy about what we want to achieve, and an understanding of the insight, which, because we're a digital organisation, is mostly through Google, additionally through survey data, around whether we're achieving this or whether we're not achieving this. I think Chris mentioned it's about articulating the vision to the team. So we regularly do that across our teams. We all understand what the organisation is about. And Chris is absolutely right that this knowledge is often in your team. So our head office is in Stoke currently. I had an away day with my team in Stoke quite recently. Even the people who, this was focused on e-commerce, but even the people in my team who weren't focused on e-commerce, because as I said in my introduction, I didn't know much about e-commerce in 2016, but I did know how to shop online. And that's exactly, but that's, everybody is bringing this experience, this lived experience of how to do things, how things look when they're done well and how things look when they need to be improved. Everybody knows that. So yeah, talking to the team, understanding that your team knows an awful lot, listening to your team, letting them have opportunity to bring ideas to the very top, I think is really, really important. And then going back to those strategic objectives, understanding where you're succeeding in relation to those strategic objectives and where you're not succeeding. And if you're not succeeding there, what is the bit of information that you are missing, that your team hasn't brought with you? And where do you get that from? You know, is that a sector partnership? So the partnership with Bloomberg around developing the Connects app, I think I will have potentially lots to learn from Bloomberg's ability to analyze data and feedback user information. So, you know, we have a partnership there coming in. We employ consultants when we don't know the answer to a particular problem. We recruit and we write the job specs with these things that we don't have in the team at the very top of the job requirements. So it's, you know, I think it's a multi-pronged approach, but really, you know, understanding what you have and listening and valuing the team that you have is really, really at the core of that, I think.
Sophia, I think also we'll pick up on a question that you posted in a minute, but you've mentored and coached quite a few people running things. How do you encourage them to get the right skills to have confidence and capability in digital enterprise?
That's a very interesting one. I think being able to tease apart the skills that they need is quite a skill in itself. And as the other panelists recognized, it's often about realizing that it isn't a skill necessarily in a particular aspect of digital, or that it's something that can be filled through experiences that are not the normal experience, such as the online shopping example. You do really need to be able to break things up into capabilities rather than just saying we need a, you know, digital innovation expert or a digital enterprise expert. And once you break it up, you may realize that you can combine, that the roles split in different ways than you thought they did it first. So, you know, thinking about where one post overlaps with another is quite important to section them out in ways, you know, it might be that you need somebody who knows both business and education, or it might be that somebody who knows business and heritage and that your education person can be mentored. I think helping them think while I'm mentoring them, helping them think about ways to get mentoring and to develop skills of people who are already in the organization is also absolutely key, because there is usually some way that somebody can be brought up to speed with the right willing and the right motivation. And given how many ways there are to educate oneself nowadays, that the trick is not so much having to take a course or having to be an expert from the start, but actually being able to know what questions to ask and where you might find the information. And that's as important in these days of adaptability and very agile job roles as it is being an expert from the start.
And that goes, I think, you know, absolutely knowing the questions to ask and not being afraid to ask those questions. So there are definitely conversations I have had where I don't really understand what's being said. I think I've got the right end of the stick, and it's actually not being scared to say, have I understood this correctly? Is this what you're proposing to do? And sometimes I haven't understood it correctly, and it's useful to get the reiteration so I do understand it correctly. But in general, you know, that plain talking at the top, I think really helps to instill confidence that this is not rocket science. It's just about asking questions.
And a reminder from Chris in the chat about paid internships. Sophia, you had a question for the other two panelists. Do you want to ask that as the final question of the day?
Yes, I was taking inspiration again from the Failspace project, and I asked, I know Chris already answered it in chat, what is one thing you've tried in digital enterprise that didn't work or that led to some unexpected conclusion, and what did you learn from it?
Do you want to go first so everybody can hear, Chris? I did see you put an answer in the chat. Do you want to?
Yeah, I can tell you about that. We did start a podcast series. I can't remember how long ago it was, but it was certainly about 10 years before anybody else thought it was a good idea. I guess the mistake we made was that we looked at ourselves and we were all carrying iPods, so we figured the rest of the world was carrying iPods too. But no, that wasn't the case. We misread our audience entirely. But I guess what we learned was what level of technical competence was required to produce a product that was of the right quality, that people could bear listening to it on such a high quality device, I suppose. And that was actually quite a steep thing to learn, and that prepared us for when we then realized that actually YouTube was the place to reach the masses.
There are some interesting general lessons there. Don't be too innovative, and don't assume that your audience is the same as you. And I think that last one is a really basic one that people do have to remind themselves of, me included.
Camilla, the final word. Well, I have to wrap up with details of the next seminar, but you do get to have the final word of the panel.
I get a final word. I think it's hard, learning, I should say, from experience and frustrations is around choosing your platform, I think, for us. And actually, again, Chris mentioned this longevity of technical infrastructure and making sure you are investing in something that is constantly being updated, constantly being renewed, where the suppliers are invested in the product as you are. So I think that's my sort of big takeaway from running our e-commerce shop. Make sure that the platform is moving with you. So we're probably going to move on to a new platform next year for our e-commerce shop because we think that there are sort of more mainstream suppliers that can actually deliver the technology, because it changes so fast. It moves so quickly at the moment that in a year it's out of date. So moving forwards with that sort of open-ended technology, I think, would be a key takeaway for me.
Amazing. Well, that was so interesting for me. I hope it was equally interesting for all of our participants. Thanks so much for being so incredibly open and honest about what you've learned along your digital enterprise journey as leaders in your own right.